All right. It's about that time again. Here we go. Paul's here. Good evening. Got a couple of people starting to show up. John's here. Awesome. Give it another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll just get started. Yep, people are pouring in one at a time. No, we're doing good. All right, Douglas is here. We're doing well. I think that's about it. So, welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight, I forgot. I wanted to get something. So before I really get started, I'm running off camera for 2 seconds. All right, it was a little more than 2 seconds, but welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Here we go again. Looks like the crowd's building pretty good. We got a bunch of people in there. Tonight's episode of Tuesday Tips was a suggestion. I'm sorry, I can't recall who it was. Several months ago when I did the brushing finished session here, I can't losing my train of thought there. Somebody had suggested or sent a question in, how do I do turn pieces or vertical surfaces? So finally getting around to it in the group. But before I jump into talking about that, and hopefully it's not going to be a tremendously long episode tonight, I wanted to say thanks to Rich Wedler of Microfence, and I'll try and get this onto the close-up camera there. He obviously is watching these episodes because this arrived in the mail today. And if you guys remember last week when I was doing the line and bury inlay, and if you haven't watched that, go back and watch. I mentioned that I had the 1/8 inch pin that it rotates on, but I didn't want to drill an 1/8 inch hole into the material because that would leave just too big a hole in the compass point, for the line and bury inlay. I'm going to switch cameras here and try and get this on camera. So, oops, that's microphone. Don't change the microphone, then you won't hear. Hopefully everybody can hear me. If I bring this over to the camera, if I can get it to focus long enough, what you guys are going to see is this is a pivot point. Here, we'll do it this way. I'll set it on the bench, bring the camera over. Stop trying to make it ridiculously easy here. Back up. Focus, please. There we go. All right, you guys can see it now. So they evidently, Microfence makes a 1/16 inch diameter pin for this thing. So shockingly, like I said, I hadn't talked to Rich at Microfence, but this showed up in the mail today. So clearly he was watching last week's episode, saw that, I had always been doing this with the larger 1/8 inch pin and just setting the point down into the little 1/16 inch hole that I create. Well, this showed up in the mail today. So thank you, Rich. That's awesome. I owe you a phone call with another thank you. But if you're watching this, number one, you need a life, Rich. Number two, thank you again. So I'm going to switch back over to the other camera and get started on the turning stuff. So there you guys can see. Let's go. Bob Wilkinson says it's nice to be here, but I'm not sure if he means, because he spelled it H-E-A-R. So I'm assuming that means you can hear me. I'm going to put the pin away there before I lose it. Off on the side, someplace that doesn't cause me agitation trying to find it later. So really, and again, I'm going to do, this is a sample turning that I've got for a gate leg table. Normally it's a cross stretcher, so it's in the table in this orientation as opposed to a vertical turning. But brushing finish on turnings really is no different than, and you guys might recognize my perpetual prop here. This was the piece of mahogany that I used with the Shaper Origin to run the grooves, and then I did the little miter on there and then the groove for the spline, and we even did a little bit of line and bury inlay on it at one point. So I've brought it back and I've got it clamped up here using my Jevons 3D squares. I'm not even sure if Jevons is still making those things, but you know, they're a pretty cool little tool. Basically just sort of like an angle bracket. It's an L shape, and I just have it clamped there. So this will be my vertical surface, obviously, and I'm going to attempt get rid of some of that dust on there, because that won't make for a good finish, but it might make for a textured area where you guys start to brush it. Hopefully I'm going to be able to get this turned into a direction where I can get some good raking light on there, and you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Same thing with the turning. I will probably work with it in that direction so that we can get it on camera a little better. And so without further ado, what I've got is a couple of my shellac brushes. Again, I'm using, these are badger hair brushes that I got from Jamestown Distributors in Jamestown, Rhode Island. They're a boat supply company, and they seem to, as oddly, the boat supply places have these things cheaper than the woodworking. And then what I've got is I made up a little bit of, it's some amber shellac with about 50% alcohol, 50% shellac. And this jar over here, if you're wondering, is pure alcohol. I threw the brushes in there for a while this afternoon so that they were nice and pliable. All right, so let's switch some cameras. Yeah, Vincent, blame you for this topic. Yes, I had a feeling that was you, Vincent, but I wasn't going to say it in case I got it wrong. I had it stuck in my head that you were the one that said that. So let's switch that camera over, and we're going to get started doing some, yeah, I know I'm not focused on anything at this point, but I'm going to bring it out front here and see if we can't get some raking light, pull it in tight on my piece. Let's do the vertical surface first. Why? Because I want to. All right, I'm going to leave it about there. That's interesting. Oh, hey, turn that screen around so I can see what's going on too. All right, so we're going to try and get this into some kind of a raking light here. So, again, if I'm doing this, the methodology is not all that much different than what I showed you guys before. I'm going to dip the brush in about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to wipe it fairly clean so it's not super wet. And what I'm going to do is start before the end. Yeah, you can't even see that. I'm going to back up the camera just a tiny little bit. Wide. Wrong way. There we go. Oops. Don't hit the camera. Don't hit the tripod. Is that a little better? Let's see. Almost. Yeah, you can see there's about 2 inches below that. But the idea here is I'm going to start before the end here. Let me dip a little more because I'm sure that's dry. About 1/8 of an inch into the liquid. Brush off on the rim. I'm going to start before the bottom of my piece and work up. And we're going to cover, pardon me, as much of this as quickly as possible without working it too much. Again, this is shellac, so this is going to dry a lot faster than if this was some kind of a varnish or polyurethanate. So you can see I started, whoops, crappy little clamp, right? I don't have finish. Usually when I work on a flat surface like that, what I'm going to do is work sort of off the end and come down, because if I go this way, I'm wiping the brush on that adjacent surface. So again, keep that finish kind of thin, and it doesn't matter what I'm brushing at this point, whether it's a varnish, shellac, water-based or oil-based. The idea is keep the finish nice and thin, and then sort of work from somewhere be in the middle. And I don't necessarily make it uniform, my starting and stopping point, so that I can overlap and go back and forth. And I'm going to go from somewhere in the middle out towards the end so that I don't wipe that adjacent surface. All right. All right. So far, no questions, which is a good thing. Hopefully you guys, I mean, you saw the color change. If I can get enough raking light here, which it doesn't seem to want to work that way, but if I tilt it down and use the ceiling lights, what you're going to see is I've got a nice even coat on here. There's not even any brush marks, because I thinned down the material, number one, and I used almost a dry brush to put it on. So I have a coat on here, and it's already tacky. In fact, up here it's already dry. But you can see some of the light reflection in there, and I don't even see any brush marks. So that's the key to this, is to get that first coat or two on real thin, and move along as quickly as you can to get the surface covered, particularly with something fast drying like shellac. Again, if I was using an oil-based varnish, I'm going to lay it on the same way. In fact, or if I was using the 1/3 oil, 1/3 varnish, 1/3 thinner, I would be doing the same kind of thing. In fact, I would probably make it 25% oil, 25% varnish, 50% thinner, and then that way I could put it on and not have to worry about overlap marks or anything like that. The idea is, let's just get it on as quickly as possible. Use those tips of the brush. You saw I wasn't really pushing down hard, and I had it the brush is fairly perpendicular to the piece. Hopefully, if I tilt that now, you guys can see you can see the wet spot now and the brush marks that I just put in there, right? So Pete Block wants to know, how soft is that brush? Is it the type that ends with the ends that softened? I'm not sure what that means. Is it the type with the ends that are softened? It's a fairly soft brush. I mean, I'm putting shellac all over my hand right now. That's the depths that I will go to for you. Here's a smaller one. This is just a 1 inch instead of a 2. But it's a fairly soft brush. If you mean by, are the bristles flagged? The answer is yes, it's a natural bristle. They do have some flagging going on at the end. That's where the bristle comes up and it's split into multiples. Matthew wants to know, what is the pound cut on there? So I started with 3 pound cut, and then I mixed it with alcohol about 50-50. So it's slightly, it's a 1.5, somewhere in that ballpark. It's fairly thin. And are the ends tapered? Yes, this brush has a bit of a natural taper to it. If you look at it, it does sort of pull in. The center bristles are higher than the outer bristles. I mean, this is a relatively new brush, and you can really see how it's definitely tapered out. The center bristles are higher. All right, I'm trying to answer those questions as we go. Pete says some of the brands have the ends that are almost frayed and trimmed. Flagged is yes, that is it. So again, these are if I can get it on camera there. I'm not sure if you can read that or not. They are Red Tree. Sorry. Getting into here, I'll try and zoom in on it again. So you can see they're a pretty standard kind of a Badger hairbrush. I also buy brushes, from the Torrington Brush Company. They're in Sarasota, Florida. That's Torrington. I will try and find some links to this stuff and throw it into the show notes so that you guys can see what's, wrong way. See what's happening there. All right, back up. We will lock this. Yeah, I got shellac all over my hand. That's awesome. All right, take my shellac here. You can kind of get this out of the way. The process, and I need to bring the camera down just a tiny bit. Again, this is not a super long episode unless you guys start asking a whole lot more questions. Because the methodology really doesn't change. I can't see what's happening because I forgot to turn the screen around on my camera. There we go. All right, now I can see what's happening. So again, I'm going to take my brush, dip it in about 1/8 of an inch, wipe most of the shellac back off of it. And when I do turnings, what I tend to do is go around the turning. So I'm going to start by coming in here in the middle, and I'm going to work back and forth. And again, it's a very light coat, thin coat. And I'm putting it on as fast as I can without being in a panic. I mean, you can see I'm covering the area pretty rapidly. It shouldn't take more than about 15-20 seconds to do a turning of this size. That said, you guys are going to time it and somebody's going to go, hey, you were 34 seconds. All right, you can see what I did was I did the turnings first, and I got up to where the pummels are, because at that point, what I've got is shellac lapping over onto my sides. And now I'm going to take and come back. And again, this would be on a piece of furniture. I wouldn't be finishing this in this fashion. So it's a little easier when it's on a real piece because I don't have to hold on to it. I can just move around and go from turning to turning, because this would be part of a base of a table. All right. So pretty easy. And again, if I try and get some of the shine off of my ceiling lights there, what you're going to see is, because I've kept everything nice and thin, you're not seeing any run marks, you're not seeing any drips, you're not seeing any brush laps, any of that stuff. Again, it's all about keeping that brush really dry and using nice thin material. So again, if I'm using a varnish or a polyurinate If I'm allowed to thin it, I'm going to. And I'm going to use the appropriate thinner. And my first coat is going to be more of what I call a wash coat, because the idea is all I want to do is get that finish on and establish a nice smooth base. If I want to start building more finish on here, and I'm just playing as I go here, you know, I can start to thicken the finish up a little bit, but again, I'm going to work with it really dry on the brush. It doesn't matter what pound cut the shellac is, or what the viscosity of my polyurethane or the varnish is. The idea is keep the brush dry, don't overload it up, which might be different if we try something else next week. You know, the idea here is to keep that material going on quickly in a thin fashion, and really just sort of make sure that you're not puddling up, you're not wiping across things. If you go this way with the brush on a turning, top to bottom or across the turnings, now if you look, you should be able to see, and I'll try and zoom in a little and see if we can't get you a good shot. I'm not sure you're going to catch. I have a lap mark that is right. Let's grab a pencil. There's a lap mark right here, and I'm not sure that's visible on camera. But, you know, as opposed to going across the grain where I can cover that whole turning in one shot, going this way means I'm wiping that brush, kind of like what I was talking about with the other piece there. If I come off the end and come in this way, I'm going to have drips and runs coming off the end of that board. Same kind of thing here on the turning. If I'm not going around with the turning, you know, if I'm going across the turned elements, now I'm wiping that material off, which is going to puddle it and it's going to want to run. And I mean, you can see here, I'm building a fair amount of shine on that piece. And I've only got 2 or 3 little instant coats of shellac on there. And again, it's very thin material. Yes, badger hair brushes, Bob. Larry says, my shellac seems a little dark. What brand or color is that? I'm not sure of the brand anymore. I have a couple of bags of flakes. They are amber or orange. I'm not sure. And again, I'm not sure what this is. It's not de-waxed. I do have some other amber over here that I had mixed that might be more the color you guys are used to. So this is Zinsser's that is just thinned out. It's Zinsser amber that's thinned out 50-50. So again, 3 pound cut in the can, poured some in here, and an equal amount of alcohol in there. So here, I'll show you that. It's not going to work any differently. So if I know it's the same brush, don't worry, it's not contaminated. The solution to pollution is dilution. All right, so again, real thin, work around. Now I'm getting a little bit, this is a little thinner than the other one. So I could have wiped a little more off the brush too. But this is going to yellow things up a little bit for me. So again, if this is a table leg, obviously I'm not going to spin it the way I am in this demo, but I'm going to still function the same way. I'm going to start turning around the piece Come back a little more and you guys can see what's going on. And all I want to do is cover the whole surface as quickly as possible. And, you know, for God's sake, if you're working with shellac, don't I was brushing that a long time. Don't overwork it. When the instant you feel the brush have a little bit of pull, it drags. You're at the point where just stop. Wherever you are, just stop. You could add a little bit, you could spritz a little alcohol on your brush if you wanted to thin it out a little bit more. But the reality is, if you feel the brush start to drag with the shellac, you're already at the point where if you keep going, you're just going to leave brush marks in it, and it's never going to come out. All right, so that answers that. Doug Smith says he likes Fid's mops for shellac. I'm not even really sure what that is, Doug, but I'm sure it's something that Mike Michelli maybe sort of touts. I don't know for sure. I'll have to look that up. So Vincent wants to know what the next step it would be. I wouldn't keep adding shellac the way that I have, although, you know, as you can see, it hasn't caused me any problems. Again, I'm working with a really thin pound cut here. I'm getting dust all over my shirt. So what I would do is I would brush a coat on everything. I would probably let it sit a minimum of a couple of hours. Longer is better. We used to, when I was making furniture for clients, it was 1, maybe 2 coats of shellac a day. Shellac dries to the touch very rapidly, but it doesn't really harden up for days. And what I would find is if I grab a piece of, I'm going to grab a piece of 400 grit sterrated paper here. And hopefully this will, so it's dry to the touch at this point, a little sticky up here, but you know, for the most part, it's fairly dry. I mean, if I wait another 20 minutes, which, yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody would complain about. We sat around for 20 minutes waiting for finish to dry. But I would take some 400 grit paper as my next step. Yeah, even though it's pretty warm and dry in the shop at the moment. I had the heat on all day because I knew I was going to do some finish work tonight. So it's a little warmer. I'm not sure if you can see or not, but it's not really pilling up, which is a little bit like right there. But you can see even though this is a sterrated paper, so sterrated paper has the abrasive glued to the paper, and then they put there's a powdery substance that goes down in between the granules that as you use it, whatever you're working with clings to the powdery substance and then falls out and keeps the surface of the abrasive surface of the paper clean and cutting instead of clogging up. Well, if your finish isn't dry enough, it's going to clog up anyway, because that semi-wet finish is going to just clog up, clump up the sterate in there. Okay, so that would be my next finish. I would put a coat on today, come back tomorrow, sand it all, because at that point I know it's good and dry. I know I'm not going to clog up and waste a whole bunch of paper. And then I would depending on the piece and what the customer would be looking for. I'm going to switch cameras so that you can actually see me instead of this close-up thing. So if it was actually for a client and they wanted it to look old, I would probably continue with the 50-50 cut shellac. Is my camera? Yeah, my camera's on camera. If the customer wanted a little bit more shine, I might mix up a little bit of shellac that is 75% 3-pound cut and maybe 25, 30%. It's a guesstimate kind of a thing. I mean, I would put in there and I would go 25% if it's still a little too thick. At that point, I might add a little bit of alcohol to it to thin it down a little more. All right, so let's see. So those would be my next steps there, Vincent. I would wait till tomorrow, sand it down. I'm kind of obsessive about my finishes, so I would tack this off, even though it's shellac. I wouldn't do it with a tack rag, a specific tack rag. I mean, it would be just a cotton cloth. And then I would go back over and put another coat of shellac on it, let it wait a day, do it again. If I'm in a hurry, like I said, I might put one on first thing in the morning, particularly if the shop isn't going to be creating an awful lot of dust during the day. At my old shop, I had a separate finishing area and so I could put a coat of finish on in the morning, let it sit in the finishing room all day while I work doing other stuff, then come back and right before the end of the day, knock it down with I tend to use either 320 or 400 grit in between coats, which I think is the next question in the chat there. What's the grit? The idea is all I'm trying to do, and it doesn't matter what the finish is that's going on, I'm trying to knock down whatever little nibs are sticking up there. Particularly when you're using shellac, the alcohol has a little bit of water in it. I remember being at one of the woodworking shows in the last few years and saying that, the reality is at room temperature on this planet, alcohol can exist without some water. It's hygroscopic. So the minute you create the alcohol molecule, it starts absorbing some water, which keeps it liquid. And a chemist came up afterwards and he's like, I didn't want to say anything to embarrass you in front of the crowd, but we do it all the time at work. And I'm like, but you do it in a vacuum chamber. And he's like, yeah. I said, that's not room temperature on the planet. That's a different thing. So, and Bob also, yes, you want to know what? So I'm 320 or 400 in between. I should have sanded everything properly to begin with. The turning on this, I did sand earlier today on the lathe, but I didn't do anything to the square stock. So normally I would have my piece together and have all of the finishes, the surfaces completely sanded, the edges broken, all of that kind of stuff before I start finishing. And at that point, I'm not trying to reabrade the surface. I'm really trying to knock down any of the nibs, any of the fibers that are raised by the water in the shellac. What you'll find is that if you're using a polyurethane or an oil-based varnish, you're going to get less of that, but they dry a lot slower. So you're also going to pick up more dust. And that's what sanding with that 320 or 400 grit. This is a 400 grit A-weight paper. If you like, I was going to do, since we're going pretty quickly here through all of this. The other question that I got, and I believe it was also Vincent, wanted to know how I do large flat surfaces. So I was going to bring in just either a tabletop or something next week where I can go ahead and do a large surface, but we can also talk about a little bit about sandpaper and what to look for and what the differences are. But so with that really fine paper, all you're trying to do is clear that film of any raised fibers or any captured dust, dirt, debris. We've had flies land in varnish over the years, and you have to sand out a fly. Bob Emmons, Chuck, does it help to wet the brush with a solvent before dipping it in the finish, alcohol or thinner, first to help the spread? Well, I did that. Like I said, I had both brushes soaking in alcohol for a little while today. I somewhere in the last week or two, I remember there was a question on YouTube. Somebody posted it on one of the older videos wanting to know, do I clean these brushes? And I'm not sure if you can see up there near the ferrule. Hey, wait, I have a close-up camera. The answer is no. I don't clean my brushes, my shellac brushes. I mean, you have to clean your varnish brushes or you just throw them away. Let's see what we got here. Bring this around here, try and get it to stand up. That ain't happening. There we go. Okay, if you look here at the ferrule, you can see years and years of shellac buildup. I'll let these sit out. The great thing about shellac, one of the many great things about shellac is I don't have to clean this because all I got to do is throw it in a jar full of alcohol for half an hour or an hour or whatever, and it completely dissolves the shellac. I mean, if you look, that was clear alcohol 3 hours ago. And it doesn't matter how long I let it sit in there. I have jars in my finishing cabinet where I put the brushes in there, and then, it might be days before I even think about them, and I go back in there and all the alcohol is evaporated off and the brushes are stiff and stuck to the bottom of the jar. If I throw in alcohol again, waited another half an hour to an hour, I should be able to pull them out and the brush is ready to go again. So that's one of the great things about shellac. Again, if you do that with polyurethane or varnish, just throw them away. I wash my varnish brushes, or I suspend them in mineral spirits or naphtha, turpentine, something like that to keep, and it's only suspended from the ferrule down. So, I mean, it's held by the handle, but the liquid, the thinner that it's in is, I don't bring it above the ferrule. I usually stop a little short. All right, back to the big camera. How many coats do I recommend, Bob? Here's the deal. I put it on and I keep putting it on until I go, okay, that's thick enough and shiny enough. So some of that's taste dependent. For me, if I'm going to use the 50-50 stuff here, and this 3-pound cut is probably a little thicker than this 3-pound cut, where I started on these before I put the thinner in there. It might be 4 or 5 coats, or if I know somebody is going to really abuse something, or they want it shinier, or they're more of a retail person, it might be 10 coats. And, that's just the way it goes. You're going to put on enough shellac until you go, okay, I can see the film. I tend to keep my finishes a little on the thinner side. If you look at most antiques, they aren't really bright, shiny, unless they were French polished, and then that's a whole different scene there. All right. So how many coats is subjective? Right. Back to Bob Emmons. Would it help to wet the? Yes, I had them soaking in here, and about 15 minutes before I turned the cameras on tonight. I shook them out completely so that they weren't dripping. They're nice and pliable. You could still feel some of the dampness from the alcohol, but they weren't, I couldn't, if I brushed over my hand or something like that, they weren't wet. If you do that, if you dip it in the alcohol and then go into the shellac, what you're doing is diluting the shellac more, and the thinner material might want to run more on you. That 1.5 pound cut, kind of, for me, for the shellac, seems to be a pretty good happy medium between thin enough and thick enough, if you know what I mean. It's thin enough to put it on quickly. It's thick enough that it builds, but it's not so thin or so thick that you can't control the thickness of the film you're leaving behind. If I was trying to use 3 pound cut straight, I couldn't have done anything like I did here tonight. There's no way I could put a thin enough layer of 3 pound cut onto this turning and not have it puddle and run. Okay, so thinner material is fine, but if you get real thin, you're either not going to build enough that it's going to make that much of a difference, or you're going to end up laying so much on that it's going to run anyway. So that's my thought. Troy wants to know, will the dewax flakes be clearer? Yep, they will. That's the whole point. Yours is more cloudy than what I'm used to using, which is dewaxed. Yeah, so the dewaxed is, if you buy Zinsser clear, that's dewaxed. The amber is not dewaxed. I guess some of it depends on why you're using dewaxed. I have some here in the shop, but I almost never use it. In 40 something years, almost 50 years of furniture making, I've never run into a problem with anything that I've put shellac on where the next coats tend to separate. But that's the, I guess, the argument that most people use for using dewaxed is I can put it on and get the benefits of the shellac, and if I want to build up a varnish finish on top of it, there's no chance of it separating. Well, I'm here to tell you that I've made thousands of pieces of furniture that have, hundreds of which have regular old amber shellac on there, kind of cloudy, waxy, with varnish on top of it. And to this date, nobody has ever said anything about, hey, I've got finish flaking off. I mean, they've taken soft scrub to tabletops and sanded the finish off, but nobody's ever turned around and said, hey, this thing is flaking on me. So I'm not a huge dewax fan. Dave Redland wants to know, is 400 grit wet dry better than the regular 400 grit? That, again, depends on what you're doing at the time. I don't use the wet dry stuff for sanding in between coats because I find the paper itself, and I do have some right here, I think. This is 220. This paper, it's my 400 grit's a little thinner. This is like a B weight. And again, we'll talk about this some next week, I think, because I think I'm really going to go a little more deeper into this next week. But no, I tend not to use the wet dry. The wet dry tends to be a little stiffer, and I think it has to do with what they're. You can see the color difference, number one. I think it has to do with what they're using. It's either the adhesive or whatever they're putting on there to make it more waterproof. Leo, what pound cut did you use? Leo, that was at the beginning, and then shortly thereafter. So this is about a 1.5 pound. I started with 3 pound. and then mix 50% 3-pound cut and 50% alcohol. Larry wants to know if I'm scared of scuffing through. Nope. Here's the deal. It's particularly on shellac. If you're using shellac, you can sand pretty hard, because particularly if you let it sit overnight, or better yet, even a couple of days before you sand again, because the longer it sits, the harder it gets, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to sand through it. It's super abrasion resistant. If I wait a week, 2 weeks, I'm not going to sand through it, but I may also not be able to sand out any runs or brush marks, or maybe even the specks of dust and organic matter that have settled onto it. Because once it really hardens up, it's a tough thing to sand. Kenny, it's good to see you, my friend. What are your thoughts on using steel wool? Well, not in between coats. I don't care if you use the Liberon stuff, which is the oil-free. There's still a little bit of oil in there. I'm not for leaving. If you want to see a finish that has potential for separating layers, use the steel wool in between. Steel wool also does not knock down the nibs. It will take out any bristles or dust or whatever's in your finish, but it's not gonna take down the nibs. All it's gonna do is push them over. You need the abrasive action of the sandpaper to cut through any of the raised grain. And I would do that even with varnish or whatever. Again, we'll talk some more about that. Leo, how many coats in one day? Go back and watch tomorrow, Leo. Will 3 coats look different than 5 coats if they're side by side? Some people will see it as being a little shinier on the 5. Some people just go, it all looks the same to me. And if it looks the same to you, then why bother with 5? Like I said, once you get a couple of coats on here and you start to build a little bit of shine, you'll be able to see, you'll be able to go, okay, it's starting to look a little too plasticky. If I go one more, it's going to look like I coated this thing in epoxy. If needed, would you add a grain filler? Yeah, so again, you guys are giving me all kinds of really good stuff for next week, because what I think, like I said, the original plan was to do the large surface thing next week, but what I'm thinking is I'll expand that a little bit, so we'll go a little longer, particularly since the following couple of weeks I'm probably not going to be available. But if I do a large board and I have one part already done, we can talk a little bit about grain fillers and how I grain fill. I'm not much on the commercial stuff. To grain fill something like this is a little bit harder than to do something like this. And here, you guys should be able to see if I rotate that through. You know, that's one coat of that stuff. And where I did that little second brush, you know, you're starting to get a little bit more shine there. So 3 more coats on this, and this would have a fair amount of shine to it. You wouldn't see the film so much, but maybe I'll throw some more shellac on there and show you that next week too. I mean, we got time. And then Leo, is there a shelf life on shellac flakes? I have never seen a shelf life on the flakes. I mean, I've used flakes that were 10 years old. Once you mix it up, however, this liquid has a shelf life. The best way to figure out whether or not your flakes have gone problematic is to mix up a little bit of this stuff, spread it on something, and then check it 20 minutes, half an hour later. And if it's still wet, it's time to go get some fresh flakes, or make a fresh jar. So this stuff was made up a couple of months ago. Once it's in the liquid form, you've got a fair amount of time before it goes bad. But the reality is, as far as I know, the flakes, as long as you're not keeping them in a warm, moist area, mine are inside of a fireproof cabinet where it's cool and it's dark. It's not hot. And you can keep them for years and years. I've never, ever, and I suppose if you take this stuff and you spread it out thin enough, it would eventually, the alcohol would evaporate off, and the flakes, you would have a film that you could break up, and you would have new flakes. But as far as I know, there's no real shelf life on the flakes themselves, and I've never witnessed any. All right. Yes, Kenny, I know I am the best. Thank you. Pardon me. Something got in my throat there. All right. So that looks like we've kind of covered everything that I was looking to cover tonight, and even a few things that I really wasn't looking to cover. So like I said, next week, I think I was debating in my head. I wanted to do something with offset turning, or I wanted to see how well this went. The idea was, I think it was also Vincent asked about doing a large flat surface. So at that point, what I'm going to do, like I said, I'll bring in a larger board, show you how I would do something that's maybe 3 feet by 3 feet or whatever I can find, that we can do a little bit of larger surface finishing on there. And then we'll talk about sandpaper, we'll talk about grain fillers, and a little bit more about some of the quirks and things like that with the various finishes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, and you're watching this post live on YouTube or on Facebook, please give me a like. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification button, because you don't want to miss any of this. Thank you guys for coming. This is really the reason I do it, is because you guys are all here. And because it's tons of fun when I've got questions coming in live. I could sit here and record all this stuff, pre-record all of this stuff, not know what your questions are, and not answer any of them. But that's why I like this, because I don't know what you don't know. So I'm glad you guys ask questions. And if you're not here live and asking questions, please feel free to join us on a Tuesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, and we'll answer any questions you've got. There are no dumb questions other than the ones you don't ask. So thanks for coming. I will see you guys next week, where we'll do large surface finishing. Thanks.